An observer design pattern can be used to create a one-to-many relationship of objects. This relationship should be such that when one object changes, then all the other connected objects are notified about that change and hence they update themselves accordingly. The basic idea in implementing this design pattern is that when an observer is created, it registers itself with an object which is normally called a subject when we are working with observer pattern. When the subject changes its state, then it notifies all the registered observers that it has changed, and then the observers can fetch the state of the subject as and when required. There can be several different kinds of implementations of the observer pattern, ranging from simple to highly complex. In this example, I'm going to show you how the observer pattern can be implemented in C# by showing you kind of a real-world example in which a weather station is going to broadcast its updates to all the connected observers. In our case, they are going to be news agencies, so we need to have a subject which is going to be the weather station, and we need to have an observer which is going to be a news agency whose job is to report all the updates which it is going to receive from the weather station. So to begin with, the first thing that we need to do is to create interfaces for the subject and the observer. So let's just do that. So interface, and then I subject, interface, I observer. Alright, so now for the subject interface, we need to have the contract for two methods which needs to be implemented by the classes which are going to implement from this iSubject interface. So the first method is going to be void and then attach, which could be used by observers to attach themselves, or I would rather say register themselves with the subject whenever they are created. So this attach is going to accept an argument of iObserver type, and let's just call it observer. And this iSubject interface also needs to have another method to notify each of the observer that a change has been made to its state. For the observer interface, we only need to have the contract or the definition of a single method which is going to be called update, and this update method will be called by the subject whenever its state is going to be changed. And this update method is going to accept the subject as an argument, so the subject will pass its own reference as an argument whenever it will call the update method of the registered observers. So our interfaces are done, and the next thing that we will do is to implement the weather station class, which is going to implement this iSubject interface. So class weather station and then iSubject. Alright, so let's first create a list of observers. So private list iObserver, and then let's just call it underscore observers. Next we will need a constructor to initialize this list. So public weather station, and then let's just initialize this observers list. Let's have a property too for the temperature, because the weather station's job is to measure all kinds of things related to the climate, but for this example we are only going to have the information for the current temperature. So public float and then temperature, let's just have a simple get and set for this property, and we will need to modify it later, but for now let's just have it this way. Okay, so now it's time to implement these two methods, the attach and notify. So public void attach, this is going to accept the argument of the observer, and when this method will be called, then we will simply add to the observers list the argument observer which is being passed when this method is being called. And let's just implement this notify method too. So public void notify. So notify method is going to be used to notify all of the registered observers that a change has been made to the state of this subject, which is weather station. So what we need to do is we simply need to iterate through the list of observers, and we need to call each observer's update method separately, and then we need to pass the reference of this subject as an argument when we will call the update method. So let's just do that. So observers.forEach, and then let's have an arrow function. Let's just call o.update in each iteration, and let's also pass this as an argument. So now we have implemented the attach and notify methods, but there is still one thing missing, and that is, when do we call this notify method? Should we call it explicitly? Well, it is going to be too much of an overhead to call the notify method explicitly whenever a change has been made. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a private float and then underscore temperature for the temperature, and then we are going to modify this public property, and then for the get I'm just going to return the underscore temperature, and for the set we are going to set the underscore temperature with the value which is incoming, and then we also need to call the notify method internally, so that whenever the temperature will be changed, then this notify method will be called and it will update all of the registered observers, and we will simply tell all the observers that a change has been made to the internal state of the subject. So we are pretty much done with the subject weather station, and now it's time to work on the observer. So in the observer interface we have the contract of the update method which we need to implement when we will be creating the class for the news agency. So let's just do that. So class news agency, and then this is going to implement iObserver. And first let's have a name for this news agency to differentiate this one from every other news agency available out there. So public string, and then let's call it agency name. Alright, let's have a constructor too to initially set the agency name. So public news agency, and then string name. So agency name, let me just scroll it so that you guys can see it. Agency name equals to name. And now let's implement the update method of this iObserver interface. So I'm just going to copy the definition from over here. Let's have it as a as a public one. And now to implement it, what we need to do is we simply need to read the temperature value from the subject object which is being passed as an argument, and then we are simply going to write it onto the console so that we can see that the observer has been notified correctly and the observer has started using that information for which it has been notified. So let's first cast this subject into the weather station type. So weather station equals to subject as weather station, and then we need to place a null check. So if weather station is not equals to null, then we need to write to the console. You know what, this code can be improved in a pretty good way, and for that we simply need to hover our mouse on these three dots. I'm not really sure if you can see them. Let me just zoom it further. So these are the three dots, and when you will hover your mouse over it, then you can simply click on this show potential fixes, and then just click on this button, use pattern matching, because it is going to shorten our code. So now you can see that the typecasting of the object is made simpler. If subject is weather station type of object, then this code block will execute. Alright, so if this condition is true, then we are simply going to write on the console, and this is going to be string.format, and then okay, so we need to provide the name and the temperature. So we will write it in this format, like news agency is reporting temperature as this degree Celsius, and then we need to provide the value for these arguments, for the 0 and 1 arguments, and this is going to be the agency name and weather station dot temperature, and that should be pretty much it. Let me just put this entire thing in new lines so that you guys can see it. Alright, so I guess we are pretty much done. You know what, let's write another empty line to differentiate between, you know, different messages. So okay, so now it's time to create the objects for the observer, the subject, and then to change the value of the temperature of the subject to change its internal state, and then have all the registered observers notified about it. So for this, the first thing that we need to do is to create the weather station object equals to new weather station, and then let's create a couple of news agencies. So news agency, let's call it agency 1 equals to new news agency. We need to provide a name for it, and let's provide the name as alpha news agency. Yep, this is the alpha one. And let's also attach this news agency to the weather station. So weather station dot attach, and then let's provide this agency 1 as an argument. Now I'm just going to copy and paste these 2 lines to create another news agency. Let's call it agency 2, change the name to, okay, so I'm just going to change the temperature of this weather station multiple times. So weather station dot temperature equals to, you know what, let's say 31.2 F. F is for float. Let's copy it some more, and then let's change these values, 28, and then, you know what, let's say 46.8, and then we can have 15.3 for some, you know, cool weather. Alright, so now let's also place a console dot read line to actually see what has been printed on the console. Let's build the code. So it's time to run this code to see the output on the console. So let's just do that. So you can see that whenever the temperature is changing, then the news agencies are being notified about this thing, and they are reporting the temperature change on their own, you know, news broadcasting services, which is this console actually. But anyways, you get the idea, right? Whenever the subject of the observer is going to have its internal state changed, then it is going to notify all of the registered observers that its state has been changed, and then the observers can, you know, use the internal state of the subject as and when they desire. So that's how the observer pattern, you know, in its simplicity works, and this is how it can be implemented at an initial level in C# language. There can be more complex scenarios, like we can use abstract classes too, along with using the interface to provide a, you know, solid contract for the implementing subject and observer classes. But for this video, that's pretty much it, guys. Do let me know what you think about it. If you like this video, if you don't like this video, in any case, please use the comments area to let me know what you think about it. And of course, if you think that you like this video and this is going to be useful for you, then please like this video and also hit the subscribe button. And I will take my leave now, and I will see you all in the next video. Till then, have a great time.